isn't this proposal then counter to that?
Yeah, because what it is it incents them to go a few steps further with the increase in the fee.
I apologize, I'm just trying to understand all the issues. What was the genesis of treating residents and non-residents differently? That was the town's decision, or that was based on the contractual?
At the time, I believe it was the board's.
It was the board's
decision at that time.
It was the board's.
Okay, in other words, I think what we told them, I'm just trying to recall, was fine for the residents, you take the aggressiveness to a certain point, but be more aggressive with non-residents, if I recall correctly.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Rowe.
There was two things. One thing was we brought up the question actually whether or not you can in fact charge more for other people than you can residents. And that was, I think that was discussed quite at length, and we felt it wasn't worth doing. The other thing was that some of the bills, in fact, I think it was suggested at the time that every month they come before the board because your Medicaid, Medicare, you can only collect, we showed money due the town that really was not, because legally you can only charge them so much money, that's it. So we send them a bill for $500. Legally they only have to pay $300, and that's all you can legally charge them. But we were showing a balance due of $200, which really isn't. You can't legally collect that. You can't charge that person that money. So I believe at the time we did suggest that every month all of those bills come before us, so the fact that they could be abated and taken care of right away.
I don't recall asking to come before us every month, but I think what we wanted was a reconciliation of those accounts that were non-collectible because it's Medicare or Medicaid or whatever it is, and to have those bills reflected. Yeah, but I don't believe we required it to happen monthly. But what we did want required monthly was that the reconciliation of those accounts, which we weren't going to collect anything on, to just be reconcile our books with Comstars, and again deem those accounts to be collected. Yeah.
Within this proposal, they're also saying to bill Medicare 30% above, which again is running counter to this discussion of past practice. Maybe we need to let Lieutenant Brady speak. But I must admit, at this point, I'm very confused.
All right. Jim, you want to?
The assigned rates, which are only 40% of our collected fees, apply to the Medicare fee structure. 60% of the possible collected fees, this is a letter from the chief that I'm reading, would be at a more reasonable level, which are aligned with actual costs. So 60% of our ambulance business would be at the higher cost and 30% above Medicare accepted rates. Okay, which a BLS, basic life support transport for a Medicare patient would be approximately, this is just for the ambulance, is $235 versus $300. The new proposal would be $367 for that same transport. So true, we are the gross receivables are higher than the net receivables once you take away your Medicare. It vastly, overweighted, as Chairman O'Leary stated. So that we do have to take that into consideration. But 60% of the ambulance transports are non-Medicaid, so we would be able to bill at that higher rate.
Bill at the higher rate, and then some of those Medicare patients also have secondary insurance, which will cover the balance of the bill, or a portion of it.
Right.
And that's why they're recommending 30% above the rate, so that they go to the secondary insurance carrier above and beyond Medicare to get the difference.
I thought, when we discussed that before, I thought you could not do that. You had to accept what they paid, period.
From Medicare.
From Medicare.
From Medicare, but if the individual has secondary coverage, whether it be Blue Cross Blue Shield or whether they have, it says here, automobile insurance coverage, if it was an automobile accident, they have coverage from their automobile insurance, and many people who are on Medicare have secondary coverage, that they will pick up the difference after Medicare.
But that question came up too. When we send them the bill, do we state that you, under Medicare, you're only required to pay X number of dollars? If you have additional insurance, you can submit it for that. Because that came up before, because if you send a lot of times these, especially the elderly people, they get a bill, they have an obligation, they feel an obligation to pay it. So if they get a bill for $500 and they really, Medicare pays $300, they see a balance of $200, they feel obligated to pay it. And I know I questioned this before, does that bill state on it that under the law, you are only required to pay the Medicare amount?
They don't even pay it, Medicare pays it. Yeah, I
Right.
don't know, I understand where you're going though, and I think if it does make it, if we can make it more clear, that, Medicare has picked up a portion, and if we're billing them for this, the remainder, which is I believe what happens, we bill them for what isn't paid. I don't know if in that notice it says, if you have secondary coverage,
I think it's just, to be
Right.
honest with you, I think it's just an ambulance bill, period. It states that,
I'm not sure.
I believe it happened, to my father. I think it is, you just get a bill from the town of North Reading,
Right.
or Comstar for X number of
But
dollars.
I think
Say what
that's a,
Medicaid-
I think
what
it's,
Medicaid paid and what the balance due.
Right, that's it. So,
We should-
like
we
I'm
should-
saying, a lot of people would think that they are obligated to pay that, when in fact, legally, they are not.
but I think if we were, and I think it's a good point, Mr. Rose bringing up, if we could point out to those people who are affected as far as the Medicare coverage, that if they have a secondary carrier for their insurance above and beyond Medicare, they should submit the bill, and, help instruct them, walk them through it so they don't feel as though they have to take out their checkbook necessarily to cover it. And again, I'm not totally familiar with what we do, but I don't think we do that. And I'm sure, well, Comstar doesn't pick this up until after it's not paid. Correct. So Comstar comes in, and they're like the collection agency for the town. So maybe we could do a little better job of communicating.
So that's our chance with Comstar. We could reiterate that to Comstar, that they notify the patient that they're not necessarily responsible for the remaining balance if there are other insurances out
Well,
there.
even when we send out the bill, I mean, we send out the initial bill, correct?
No.
No.
They do,
Comstar
okay.
gets the entire package.
Right. Right. I think that would be, I think that it would certainly enhance the town's chances of collecting the secondary source of revenue through the secondary carriers, if you help walk the people through it. And again, as Mr. Rowe pointed out, a lot of these people are senior citizens who, again, are paying a premium for the secondary coverage, but may not necessarily be aware that they can submit the bill for the balance to the insurance carrier.
And if they didn't have that secondary insurance, the balance would be wiped out.
Generally, that's what we do, we charge it off anyway, but,
Yeah, but they don't, I think, I want them to understand that, because if you send a bill to them and say that, if you have a secondary insurance, they will pay this bill. If they don't have a secondary insurance, they're liable to pay it themselves, which
Contact
they shouldn't
Comstar.
have to.
well, I'm not so sure they shouldn't have to.
No, under the law, Medicare, you have Medicaid, that's all you can charge them, that's all you're supposed to charge them.
No, that's all they're gonna reimburse you for the charge.
That's right, but
You can
that's...
charge what
wait a
you
minute,
want.
No, we went through this before, and legally, that's all they're obligated to. That's all they are obligated to under the law is what Medicare pays. That's all they're obligated to. If in fact they have further insurance, that insurance can pay more. Or if they so desire on their own, if they want to pay more, they can. But because that's why we went through this, and that's why I suggested, and I know I suggested it, every month you come in, because these Medicaid bills, and that was what, when the ambulance company was here, the collection company was here, they stated, under the law, that's all you can insist that those people pay, period.
Well, I guess the question is, if we have an out-of-town resident, excuse me, a non-resident, an out-of-town person, a non-resident, can't have an out-of-town resident, I suppose, non-resident, who got a ride in our ambulance, who has Medicare, and they have been taken to the limit on the collection agency portion of it, do they get reported to the credit bureau if they're Medicare? Or does Comstar?
I believe Comstar does not pursue it because I believe
Okay.
Mr. Rose accurate that they're legally bound only for that Medicare charge.
Okay.
If I could, Tom, Mr. Younger, do you remember when we went through this, and that was one of the things that we found, it looked like there was a large amount of money that was owed the town. We went back through and found out there was very little because we had no legal right to pursue those bills.
Those were the Medicaid bills.
Right.
Okay.
And those figures, if I recall correctly, Medicaid, approximately about between $2,500 and $3,000.
Which, in the whole scheme of things, is that a lot?
That's not the whole, no.
No, right.
But the thing was, it would make it easier for everybody, because that would be clear. So you wouldn't be dealing with that. It would be, you know, it would be, it wouldn't show up in accounts receivable because it isn't.
Well, at some point, it's gotta be carried for, as an accounts receivable for a certain period of time.
Right.
So that we,
Right.
so that we would enable the town to realize the revenue from the secondary sources. I mean, you don't just want to automatically write them off as a secondary source to pay the bill. Well, we're a public service organization, we're also trying to, you know, cover as much of the expenses as we can. And
Yes,
people
but
can-
I don't like to see those expenses covered at the expense of people that can't afford to do it.
Absolutely, and I think that's always been the position of the board. I don't know that it's going to change. In the meantime, I think we should maximize the ability to collect the revenue that's due us if the carriers are there and the coverage is there. Again, we're talking about, it said, yeah, it's a 40% increase over a $14 bill. $3. $3 more in the rate is what they're looking for, and overall, it sounds like a substantial increase for the effort that goes out. And again, if the more they collect, the better off we're going to be also. What's the recommendation? You got a recommendation, Tom?
The recommendation is, I mean, they haven't received an increase since 1992. What I'd like to be is very proactive into these issues where the accounts receivable is out there and it's not being collected. Obviously, we, Deputy Brady and I, myself, cannot be the ones that are going out there and doing it. We do need a secondary party to do that, in this case, Comstar.
You don't want to be bill collector?
No, trust me. And obviously, they don't get paid until the bill is submitted and paid. So, Comstar, right. So in this particular case, I think it would be recommended by the fire department and myself and the finance director to aggressively go after these accounts that we can go after. Obviously, if they cannot be paid and they file for the abatement and we can determine such, then we'll properly abate the account. But for those, particularly those out-of-town accounts, those non-Medicare, Medicaid accounts, I think this would be an excellent tool.
How much are we actually talking about? Like, in other words, right now, if we change to go to this aggressive, what are we talking about money that's owed to town?
The last account we had was at the end of fiscal year 00, July 1, which was approximately $13,000. But obviously with the increases, you know, in the ambulance funds and such, you know, we haven't included this year FY01. Those numbers could be much higher.
Is that 13,000 just for that fiscal year? Or is that what's been owed for the town over a number of years?
That's primarily fiscal year 00.
And again, I think we're reconciling it more often than we were previously. So,
I'm sorry, it's just a tool that's not costing us, that will bring our finances up slightly greater than what we had in the past. And it's something, particularly with Action Ambulance coming in and Armstrong being out, the money that we have received by going with Action and not going with Armstrong, like the other sister communities stayed with Action also. We'd like to continue the proactive program we have here and trying to save the community funds and maximize our revenues.
all right. You didn't have a motion prepared for us this evening. I mean, this is a discussion.
For discussion purposes,
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
possibly to have a full board, to have Mr. Vino.
Okay, I think if we could just get a little more clarification on some of the questions
Sure.
we had, and then we can bring it up at the next meeting and
That's fine.
forth a proposal for us to endorse. Again, the members of the board, you know, weigh in as far as whether or not we want to, I mean, to this point, it's the board that does the abating. date